second Global Book Club. Hopefully some of you will have made it to the first one with Sarah. And now we have gone to a slightly different perspective this time, which is economics. And you're probably thinking, what has that got to do with nursing? Well, if you've seen the social media lately and news in the last week, you'll know that ICN are saying it's all about that. And we are lucky enough to have Howard with us today, the chief exec. So our format today is that we have this wonderful author, Katherine Trebeck, who is a political economist, writer, and advocate for change, for economic system change. And Katherine and I are lucky enough to work with each other. She is a visiting fellow here within Edinburgh Futures Institute at the University of Edinburgh. And we have got together a wonderful panel of early career nurses, midwives, who are going to discuss with Katherine her book, The Economics of Arrival. So we're going to kick off with our guest speaker, the keynote speaker, Howard Catton, who everyone must know, who is the Chief Exec Officer for the ICN, the International Council of Nurses, the largest global voice of nursing, with over 130 plus National Nursing Association members, representing 28 million nurses worldwide. Can you imagine? Absolutely fantastic. ICN have been doing a great job on this. So I am going to hand over to Howard, and he is going to enlighten us with what ICN is doing, leading our profession globally. And Howard, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're super busy at the moment. You've got lots on, but you've said yes to our invitation. So over to you. Thank you so much.
There's always time for the Nursing Now challenges. Good morning, good evening to all of you. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you. Just a little belatedly to wish you a very happy International Nurses Day. And of course, a week before that, an International Midwives Day. And as our American colleagues now do, they have a whole week of celebrations for nurses and midwives. The theme of this year's International Nurses Day, which is set by ICN every year, was and is the economic power of care. And I've got a few slides. I'm going to share my screen and take you through the report that we have. Published. Can everybody see that? Is that pops up, Aisha? Yeah, great. You can see that. So this is the front. See it.
Sorry. Yeah, we can see it all. Wonderful. Thank you, Howard.
Perfect. So this is the front cover for this year's International Nurses Day report. The report's freely available to download from the ICN website and through links on right across the social media channels. As I said, ICN set the theme every year for International Nurses Day. It's not obligatory that countries have to use that theme, but very, very, very many do. And this just gives you an idea of the themes that have been selected over the last few years. And you can see that we focused on some of the big global health challenges like universal health coverage, the SDGs, planning of the future workforce as well, protecting and sustaining the rights of nurses and of people as well to access to health care. So we have been deliberately demonstrating the nursing linkage, the nursing contributions to the global health agenda. And all of these reports contain very powerful evidence about nurses' effectiveness and how nurses change and improve outcomes and the sorts of nursing models of care that can deliver all of that. But as powerful as that evidence has been and is, I still don't think that we were cutting through in terms of investment, in terms of seeing hard resources go into our profession in the way that we would want to see. And that's why this year we said, look, we made the nursing arguments, we made the health arguments. We have to make the arguments about the money, about the dollars, about the euros, about the yen. Money and data talk in the health policy world, as they do in most other worlds as well. And we need to be in that space, and we need to be part of that dialogue as the nursing profession. And we know we have got a very strong case to make. Firstly, you all know that ill health costs more and is expensive. This slide captures some of the key data that we have in relation to the costs of ill health. And just to say, this isn't just what ICN thinks. The report has got a range of authors from organisations like the OECD and the World Bank as well. So these are people outside of our profession who are experts in economics, in the same way that you're going to hear from wonderful Katherine later as well. Cost of treating harm is estimated for countries to be around 13% of total health spending. That countries spend about 13% of all of their health spending on the harms that have been caused by health care. When you look globally about the impact of poor health on global GDP, it comes in at around about 15%. Now, we all know, we lived through and saw the impact that the global pandemic had on the world's economies. That was estimated to be between a 3 to 7% hit on the global economy just from the pandemic, costing around about 2.7 trillion. So the 15% figure is huge in monetary terms. We know that nurse turnover rates, of course, is an important factor. It's a natural phenomenon that will always occur. But once you start pushing above 10%, it raises questions about quality of the workplace, how people's experience of work is being felt. And we're seeing turnover rates between 15 and 36%. Estimates that the cost, it will vary from country to country, of course, but an average cost of replacing a nurse who leaves is around about 36,000 in US dollars. And importantly, we can save, it's estimated, if we have better access to healthcare, 60 million lives. That comes in at about an increased global life expectancy of 3.77 years. Flip it around then and say, okay, those are the costs. What are the potential benefits? The report clearly demonstrates how health can be a driver for economic growth and prosperity. Very simple point, but one we need to make. Well, people can work. They can contribute economically. People who take a long time to get well, if they have an illness and take a long time, are out of the workforce. And we know all of the other impacts that has in terms of income, poverty, disengaging communities. And even if people are not working in a paid employment, if they're contributing to societies in other ways, they're engaged and adding and clearly adding benefit. One of the big global consultancy organizations, McKinsey's, who we might not necessarily rush to for evidence on nursing all the time, but they estimate that healthier populations could boost global GDP by up to 8% as an immediate boost, a more shorter term boost, equating to about 12 trillion. And of course, people worry about, well, look, when will I see those benefits? Is it 5, 10, 15 years down the road? That's a long time to wait if I'm thinking that I might be re-elected as a politician in the next 1, 2, 3 years. The return on investment evidence, you put $1 in, you're at least going to double that in terms of the return on investment. It could even be more, between a $2 to $4 return on in investment. And of course, I've mentioned already the increase in average life expectancy. That return on investment figure, again, the evidence shows that will be even higher in low middle income settings. Could be up to even 10%, a 1 to 10 ratio on return on investment. And again, huge numbers there in terms of money that could be saved. What then? Let's see. We looked at costs. We looked at benefits generally. What then in terms specifically about the nursing workforce? We hear a lot, don't we? We know that universal health coverage, access to healthcare, big WHO priority. Only about half the world's people currently have access to universal health coverage. WHO have an indicator about UHC scores, and this is just to give you a feel for where the shortage of nurses may be at the moment. If we were to say that we want all countries to have a universal health coverage scores of 80 out of 100, we'd be more ambitious about where we want to reach. There's only that would require there to be about 70 nurses per 10,000 population. You're not going to remember all of these numbers, I know, but the takeaway from this is that currently we believe that around about 75% to 80% of countries around the world are below the 70 nurses per 10,000 population threshold. Nurses consistently report not being able to work to their full scope of practice. This is an easy win in terms of unleashing the potential of advanced practice nursing, the nursing models of care, which should be absolutely at the forefront of dealing with aging populations, NCDs, you all know about. There is also a really significant gender and inequality dimension to investing in healthcare. We take a double hit in nursing. We know that the work of nurses has been undervalued economically. Worse still, it's just been ignored or dismissed as being seen as irrelevant. And we know that something like 70% of unpaid care is undertaken by women, and we know that 90% of our profession are women as well. So this undervaluing or ignoring the economic value of care affects us from a gender perspective, from a women perspective, but also from a health perspective, because on both counts, in health terms, in terms of the work that women do as well, they are undervalued. Very simply as well, if we invest in nursing, we are investing in addressing gender inequalities as well. We know that nurses' work contributes to addressing poverty, to promoting social cohesion, peace and prosperity. I'll say a little bit more in a moment about the ICN Nurses for Peace campaign. So, conclusion of the evidence that we've seen, we have all heard for far too long people talk about just the costs of nurses and nursing rather than the investment, and that's a line that people have used for quite some time. But that attitude, that view, makes people think that actually if we invest a lot of money in nursing, we're putting the brake on economic growth. We believe this evidence shows the opposite is true. Investing in nursing, investing in health is applying the accelerator, not the brake, to global economic growth and prosperity. These are just some of the wonderful people who have contributed as authors to the publication. I'm not going to name them all and go through them all, but the point here is that there are some eminent nursing advisors in here as well, but also key influential folk from other organizations. I've mentioned the OEC, the World Bank. Jordan Shannon recently authored a report on the gender equity issues for the World Health Organization. What do we need to do? It's not rocket science, colleagues. This is the Charter for Change, the ICN 10-point plan of what needs to happen in terms of investment, recruitment, retention, nursing leadership, supporting advanced practice. We published this last year, and the recommendations for action contained in this year's report reflect and mirror and reinforce the Charter for Change. And this aligns with the current global strategic directions on nursing and midwifery as well. So if people say, okay, we get the evidence, what do we do? This is what we do. This is what we need to do. This is an issue that I believe we're seeing is absolutely being picked up by other key and influential organizations. I've mentioned the World Bank a few times. I've mentioned McKinsey's. The World Economic Forum is another organization that ICN have been working closely with. There will be a report in just a few weeks' time on the future of the care economy from the World Economic Forum that we've had the opportunity to contribute to as well. And it makes the point, again, the broad but important point, that the care economy is underinvested. The underinvestment in the care economy is damaging and harming to global economic growth. But if we did more about that, for many of the reasons that I've said, by getting people into work, the opportunities for job creation in the care economy as well, those people who will lose their work, their jobs as a result of changes in our societies through AI and technology, for examples, we should be offering, today's bank tellers the opportunities to be the nurses of tomorrow as well. Look out for this report, because it's about the care economy more generally, but reinforces the need for investment in nursing. This is our president, Dr. Pamela Cipriano. She, very importantly, has recently been appointed to the UHC 2030 initiative. This is a global platform of key organizations to push forward and advance for UHC. She's recently been appointed to be the co-chair of that group, which is again significant opportunity, recognizing the power potential of nurses. I've mentioned some of the organizations we're working with, and to let you know, ICN have been lobbying very strongly that we needed a second State of the World's Nursing report. That was announced at the ICN Congress by Dr. Tedros last year. Work has just started on that, and that will take place over the course of this year to get the next State of the World's Nursing report published, aim for the first quarter of next year. And that report, the data in that report, will then inform the revised strategic directions for nursing and midwifery, the global nursing strategy. All really important opportunities to reinforce some of these messages that I've shared with you. But back to this point about making sure we take these arguments out of the nursing bubble as well. We had the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at our Congress in Montreal last year. He addressed the Congress. He then had a meeting with the ICM board. He's here with the ICM president, our board. The lady on the left of Prime Minister Trudeau is Lee Chapman, who's the Chief Nursing Officer for Canada as well. It's just an example. These are the places that we need to take our conversations to not as important as WHO is and those global health organizations. We need to be taking them to organizations like the G7, the G20, as ICN has been doing, of our global political leaders and the global economic institutions too. That needs to be our ambition. I said I just wanted to mention our Nurses for Peace campaign. This was something that we established after the invasion of Ukraine. We've been consistently providing support to nurses in Ukraine, particularly worried about events at the moment. There's a message on social media from the president of the Ukrainian Association she provided us with for International Nurses Day. But it's expanded beyond that into places like Sudan and Afghanistan and Myanmar as well. This is about trying to provide nurse-to-nurse support. But the reason I mention this in the context of the economic case, again, this is an example of where the work that nurses do to bring health, healing, to support people's respect of their rights, to address inequalities, these are all factors that are contributors. If they're not there, they contribute to tensions, to breakdowns in societies, to conflicts as well. The ICN Code of Ethics makes it very clear the relationship between the work of nurses and peace as well. So we bring, as a profession, all of the health benefits that we know about. This latest report brings forward many of the economic benefits, and there is also a peace dividend from investing in the nursing profession. We've got a couple of big events coming up in the next 12 months. One in Scotland, virtually next door to Ayrshire. Of course, we did that deliberately in September. And then, not too far for Aisha to travel either, to go to Helsinki
I'll be there.
next year for our Congress. Lots of these issues will be on the agenda and under discussion then. Some of you I know have been. It's always lovely to see you there. We've got some important news soon about the evolution of the ICN Student and Early Careers Network as well. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much. Pleasure as always to be with you. Back to you, Aisha.
Fantastic, fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. It's what we've been waiting for, Howard. Great presentation. Fantastic for our Nursing Now Challenge, early career nurses and midwives, to hear from you directly, to understand the importance of the work. And actually, a lot of resonance there of moving forward the work that you were involved with the whole, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for ICN, Howard, WHO, who kind of really, the inception of Nursing Now was part of their work and the triple impact report. And you've really built on this and are taking this forward, which is fantastic. The 10-point charter, use it, spread the word, everyone, and the importance of coalitions, and those coalitions that ICN are building with key organisations and their events. Thank you so much, Howard. I know that Howard says if anything crops up, he can't stay the whole time, obviously, but he is willing to get our feedback and pick that up, and we can make sure that we're addressing any of the issues. But we've got Christine Hancock join us, Howard, at the minute, and Raweda is here with some of our early career nurses. It's wonderful, a great panel, and thank you so much again. Send our very best wishes to ICN and thank them for all the work they are doing and that you are doing too. But stay on the call. So we are moving over to the wonderful Katherine Trebeck, who actually instigated the group of wellbeing economy government. So I'm desperate to hear from you. You have 10 minutes to give us context, Katherine, and I'm really grateful for your time with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aisha, and how incredibly wonderful to be with you this evening. I'm in Australia, so it's dark outside. It's well gone Friday night. I also want to acknowledge I'm on the traditional lands of Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and it's unceded Aboriginal land, and I want to really respect and pay my respects to any First Nations people who are here with us this evening or this morning or wherever you are, but also really just appreciate what the traditional owners have done to caring for our precious natural world here in Australia and across the globe, in just really protecting our waterways, our skies, our forests, our rainforests, and just our oceans. So really grateful for them. And I'm particularly feeling very grateful to nurses this week. I had a little day procedure in hospital this week, and as you would imagine, was just so, I felt wrapped up by the care of the nurses who are looking after me on Wednesday. So I think it's particularly timely. My love for nurses is always pretty high, but I think it's maxed out this week. So yeah, so how wonderful to be with you. So I'm going to try to be very brief to give you a bit of a summary of the story of the book that we're talking about this evening, the Economics of Arrival. And I'm particularly grateful to Ibrahim, who is wearing the right color, this yellow book that my friends call it the yellow book. So thank you, Ibrahim, for dressing in the yellow. The story, the background to the book is actually, it sort of involves a meeting in London. I was working with Oxfam Great Britain for about 10 years, and you'll probably all know Oxfam as an organisation that focuses on global justice. And I was in the research and policy teams there. Some of my work was looking at poverty and inequality in Scotland, where Aisha is based and where I used to live. And it's just very, very hard to live in a town like Glasgow, where I spent almost 20 years living, where you're there in GDP terms, one of the 6th richest countries in the world. And yet there are parts of Glasgow where life expectancy is in the mid-50s. And it's very hard to see those sorts of health inequalities and not start saying, what is going wrong here? Why is this enormous economic wealth not translating to good lives for enough people in the country of the UK or Scotland, But at the same time, really seeing how the economies of countries like the United Kingdom, like Australia, where I'm now based, like Canada, the US, Germany, and so on, how the economic models of those countries were also taking more of their ecological fair share. And by doing that, they're quite literally not leaving enough ecological room for our cousins and friends around the world to increase their basic material needs. And so, and we're essentially, by saying that reality meant inequality is baked into the system. There's always going to be some who have more wealth and resources and using more ecological room, and others who will have less and not have the space to the right to develop to increase their basic needs. And so I was sort of wrestling with those paradoxes. And then I met a chap in London called Jeremy Williams, and I was probably pulling my hair out a little bit or head in my hands and just sharing with him this sort of grappling with those paradoxes. And he, over a coffee, he just said to me, well, do you know what? Countries like the UK need to recognize that they've arrived. And there was something in that phrase, as someone who lived the other side of the world from the place I grew up on. I had a very acute sense of this idea of arrival and coming home, the emotional feeling. And I thought, well, there's something there. And so I said to Jeremy, well, let's write a blog playing with that idea. And we never wrote a blog, because then we thought, well, maybe it's going to emerge into a discussion paper. And we never wrote a discussion paper, because what happened is it turned into this book. And essentially we teased out this idea of GDP growth. Yes, it brings benefits when you don't have enough. So probably in parts of Glasgow, probably in parts in some of the countries that you're joining us from, you will need more economic growth. There's a really key caveat to that, though, that economic growth delivers what we're really after. So the good lives, the sort of social justice, the environment, the quality of jobs, the increased living standards. Economic growth delivers that when it's used to invest in our collective institutions, water, sanitation, education systems, and healthcare systems. So it's not just growth on its own. It's not an automatic read across. We need to really use it to invest in those collective institutions. But there's also a reality that the benefits of that growth start to tail off. So there's this idea in economics of diminishing marginal returns. And you all be familiar with that if you've maybe put too much salt on your food, or maybe had one extra scoop of ice cream and then an extra scoop of ice cream beyond that, where you start to feel a little, well, that was too much. The benefits start to tail off. And so it is with economic growth. When it's used well in early stages, it really matters, but the benefits start to tail off. But also, we're now in a world where the nature of economic systems in countries like Australia, the UK, the US, Canada, where they are generating huge levels of economic inequality. They're pushing Mother Nature beyond what she can handle. And we are seeing that in our communities, on our TV screens, with stories around the world, what's happening when Mother Nature's pushed beyond what she can handle. And I say the word we there, but of course it's not everyone. It's huge inequality in who it is who's using more of the world's resources. And there's a very strong correlation between economic wealth and disproportionate impact on the planet. So that's a really important caveat to remember. But it's also hurting people. We're seeing rising levels of loneliness, rising levels of despair. And what's happening when people are feeling that acute despair, they are reaching for coping mechanisms. And some people are reaching for coping mechanisms at the pillbox. And in your work, you probably see what happens when people keep or the bottle, or turning to these sort of false coping mechanisms. But they're also reaching for coping mechanisms at the ballot box with the rise of populist political leaders. We're being offered these simplistic, divisive policies, and people are just desperate for something. And so they're reaching for those mechanisms. And so the idea of arrival comes into that space and says, could we allow ourselves to ask the question, does the story and the project of economic growth have an endpoint? Could we get to a point where we say, do you know what? It's done its job. And then we need to turn our attention to another task, and that's the task of making ourselves at home. That's really about sharing and cherishing the fruits of that growth, taking care of our planetary home, making sure that everyone has enough, because you could have enough in aggregate, and the inequalities in countries like the UK are an example of that. You can be very wealthy in aggregate, but it doesn't mean that everyone has enough if those at the top are hoarding it. And so the part two, and I think probably even the more critical part of the book, is how do we make ourselves at home in what ultimately is a world of plenty? How do we share the resources? And so the book talks through different sorts of business models. It talks through different ways of using production and consumption, so the circular economy. It talks about purpose in jobs. It talks about different ways of doing decision making. And I think Jeremy, my co-author, counted up and he said we've got about over 50 examples from over 30 different countries around the world. And so and I think what's really inspiring about those examples is that they show that a different way of doing things is utterly, utterly possible. And there's no GDP correlation of where those beautiful ideas and sources of inspiration and chinks of light come in. We can get inspiration from anywhere in the world. And I think one of the exciting things about a conversation like this, that's very global in its nature, is that I'm sitting here in Australia, in the capital city in Canberra, that in a material sense is very, very wealthy, but it's not sorted. There's a lot of suffering. There's homelessness, there's mental health anxiety, there's inequality, there's a lot of unhappiness. And there's lots of ideas that we can share and learn for each other. And I think that's one of the stories too, that just to spark off conversations where we can learn from each other. So I know there are some amazing questions to come. I'm going to stop there so we can dig into those questions, and really looking forward for our discussion. Thanks, Aisha.
Wonderful, Katherine. Thank you for such an eloquent overview of this very important work that you do. And for those of you who want to find out more about Katherine, she has a beautiful webpage. And it really is wonderful to see that there are people outside our discipline who are very, very interested in the same things that we are, for safe care, for health for all, universal health coverage, and that feeling of well-being for our population and our patients that we care for. We have got a stellar lineup. We have got our early career nurses. They're from all over the world: Nigeria, Taiwan, China, Pakistan, Sudan, and that last one, as you know, always is a little bit special for me. Half Sudanese, half Scottish, so a little shout out there. We're going to kick off. We have 3 chapters that these early career nurses and midwives have read. So we're going to start off with Nigeria and Taiwan. Ibrahim and Aaron are going first. Please go ahead with your questions. Ibrahim, you're first.
Okay. Good morning. So I am Bushra Mubalakwe Ibrahim from Nigeria. I'm a registered nurse midwife. So my question goes thus. In a scenario where a nation is striving for growth and development, the government's persistent borrowing stabilize the economy, unfortunately fails to ensure equitable distribution of the resulting benefits. This imbalance has resulted into a great failure. In your opinion, do you believe that increasing inflation, raising the tax rate, and introducing new taxes could stabilize the economy of the country again?
Thanks, Ibrahim. And as with all the questions, this is one that we could probably spend a few hours talking about. And I was apologizing to colleagues earlier that I think my answers are going to feel quite truncated and inappropriately short for the richness of the question. So just a carte blanche in apology for that. So one point I want to make is I think a lot of that borrowing and the debt instruments that are set up are often designed in favor of people and institutions that are very powerful. And actually you're seeing a flow of resources from countries in the majority world to economic institutions and lenders who have already got a massive amount of wealth. And so if you want to learn more about it, there's an incredible book written by one of my colleagues, Jason Hickel, who's now at the Autonomous University in Barcelona, called The Divide. And he just talks about the incredible imbalances of financial flows around the world. And actually what you see is the flow of resources from countries in the majority world to financial institutions in the global north. So one, there's that really problematic nature of the way some of that borrowing is set up. And in terms of to the heart of your question around what are some of the responses to that inequality, now, of course, inflation has a distributional effect in and of itself, because it's often folks on lowest income who are seeing food price rises, who are seeing energy price rises, maybe cost of housing, who don't have the margins to be able to cope with that. And then it's folks who have got savings, for example, are seeing, you know, the asset increase of their house or their money in their bank account. So again, that in itself can increase economic inequality. You've mentioned the cost, choice around increasing taxes or bringing in new taxes, and I think let's talk about both of those. Tax can play a really important role in rebalancing economic inequality through when it's a progressive tax system. So when you have more tax on the wealthiest, and when you perhaps channel that through instruments like welfare funds, through social protection, through the social wage to those who don't have enough, and ideally universalist policies as well. But I also think tax has another really important role that in Australia, certainly, I don't know about Nigeria, certainly don't talk about that enough. And that's the idea of using tax to encourage the sort of behaviors we want more of, and to sort of disincentivize, discourage behaviors that are not aligned with what people and planet need. And so I think it'd be really great if countries like mine, and perhaps other countries who are represented here today, we're able to have a conversation around, well, what sort of businesses do we want more of? What sort of behaviors do we want to see in our economic ecosystem? And how can tax reward that? So one great example that you see in places like Italy is lower tax on economic models like worker cooperatives. And we know they have a really great distributional benefit. You can see already how I start to just and so I'm going to stop there to move to the next question. But Ibrahim, I'd love to come back to that and dig into it a bit more if we have time at the end.
Thank you so much. And also, I think the one thing is, this is the first time that we're having this conversation, certainly in Nursing Now Challenge. The ICM report has really kicked those ideas off, but for many years we've been seeing the importance. So don't worry, today is just the lifting of the lid. We can develop this conversation as we go on. I think this is what we're seeing, these first steps of nurses being engaged with this type of conversation. So over to Aaron next, I think, for the next question. Thank you, Aaron.
Yes, hi. I'm Zhongbo Huang, but you could call me Aaron. I'm from Taiwan, currently a master's student in the University of Edinburgh. So at first it's like for me, approaching this book, it's quite daunting in a way. It's like we are not that familiar with the idea of economy itself. And specifically find it's quite insightful. So I encourage everyone to check out Catherine's TED Talk. It's really nice it's a breaking point, essentially. I particularly love the quote that's like, society has fallen in love with something that is holding it captive. And you mentioned the rotten fruit of growth in this chapter, especially. It's so fascinating. So my question is, you mentioned our failure to tackle the costs, resulting in huge sums being expended to deal with the consequences. So what do you think should be the priority for GDP-rich countries in addressing the advancement in healthcare?
Thanks, Aaron. And we've probably passed each other on the corridors of the University of Edinburgh. So great to see you again if we have. So what Aaron's talking about there in it is this idea that we talk about in the book called failure demand. And it's a term that comes from management literature, a chap called John Seddon. And he basically warns that just because you're getting more demand, for example, for your call center, if you're a business, he says, that may not necessarily be a good thing if all of those calls are complaints about your product. So if your phone's broken or something, people are complaining to ring up and says, it's not always a good thing. And about 12 years ago in Scotland, there was a huge commission looking at the future of public services in Scotland. And one of the things they looked at was the extent of demand on public services. And they said, let's take that idea from management literature, and what we see is that a lot of the demand on local government and on the Scottish government is driven by poverty and inequality. And once you start looking at government announcements through this lens, you will see, I guarantee you, you will see examples everywhere. In ecological economics, they talk about defensive expenditure. And so you can think about how spending to repair infrastructure and buildings after there's been an environmental disaster, that's maybe a bushfire or an enormous flood or tornado, or the overtime for emergency services workers, just building back after those disasters. I'm not going to call it a natural disaster because it's driven by our impact on the planet. So that's defensive expenditure. But the same concept really applies in social policy, and this is this idea of failure demand. So it's essentially layers and layers of spending through the different government budget lines that are driven by poverty and inequality, that are basically responding after the fact. They're repairing, they're fixing, they're attempting to heal after the damage has been done. And actually, there was a report by the organisation I was part of co-founding, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, that looked at the levels of failure demand for Scotland and for Alberta, of all places. And in a minute, I'll try and put the link for that in the chat, or maybe someone could pull it up. And I think I think this will be really familiar to you as nurses and folks in various aspects of the health system, because the health system with a capital H and a capital S, a lot of that spending is necessitated by inequality and poverty. You'll be very familiar with the socioeconomic gradient of health, how we see people. There's a book called The Body Bears the Scars, and you'll be seeing people whose bodies bear the scars of poverty, of inequality, of feeling alienated from each other, of feeling a lack of purpose. And what happens is you get governments coming in, and the way our systems are being set up is that downstream, after the fact, treatment, intervention, catching people once they've been hurt and once they're sick. And it's expensive. It's very often very high skill. Often in many contexts, it's a lot of high tech. And of course, it's important. I don't want to denigrate that work, because that's crucial because of the setup where we are today. But I guess I want to, and in the book we talk about this, and the wellbeing economy agenda, this is the heart of it, is can we dare to imagine something different, where we get things right first time round, where people are living the lives where they feel fulfilled, where they feel in control, where they have enough to take care of themselves and their families, where they have shelter over their head, where their work gives them a sense of purpose and control and autonomy. And so they're not turning up at their GPs for anti-anxiety treatments. Or we've just seen here in Australia, the government budget came out during the week, and one of the big headlines was around how they're raising rent assistance because of the housing crisis. Now, that's a massive band-aid, or sticking plaster, as we'd say in the UK, on a malfunctioning housing market and labour market. So I think what's really exciting about this conversation is that nurses have a very powerful testimony to just call out, hold up a mirror to that reality, and to say to government, it's yes, you need to be investing in helping people survive and cope, but we can do better than that. And working with your colleagues in public health, working with your colleagues in education departments, working with your colleagues in environmental departments, working with your colleagues who are talking about inequality and how the economic model is designed. And I think that's a really, really powerful, exciting conversation, Aaron.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Aaron. And I love that quote, and just love some of the quotes you've talked about, bodies bearing the scars. I mean, hugely.
That's not mine, that's a book.
Yes, no,
I can't claim that
know.
one.
No, I know, but just raising that. And I think when we're thinking about influencing and engaging with policymakers, yes, they want the data, but they do also, we should pull at those emotions, because that's what drives us as human beings. So the two together can be very powerful. So we're moving on to chapter 7, and Chapter 5 with Ibrahim and Aaron, thank you so much, was entitled Rushing Past Our Stop. Chapter 7 with I Am from Nigeria and Georgia from China, what we might find in making ourselves at home. So I am over to you, Nigeria. And I just want to say a very special shout out. We have the Nigerian government chief nurse joining us. So that is just outstanding to have that leadership here supporting everyone. So I am no pressure. And Abraham, you did well. She put a lovely note in the chat about you. So next questions, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Holloway. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Catherine. And as I was reading the book, there's just a ton of questions I wanted to ask, but I had to just come down to this one. And I've gone through your website and watched some of your TED Talks on YouTube. It's really, really amazing. And I cannot recommend it enough. Go to
Thank you.
Katherine's website and YouTube, watch a lot of what she's doing. And I want to also appreciate Howard Cotton for the amazing keynote speech. It's always nice listening to him. So my question is, how can nurses who have transitioned to post-arrival economics leverage their professional experience and expertise to contribute to the improvement of healthcare system in their homeland?
Thank you. And thank you for those warm words too. That really means a lot to me. I'll treasure those words. Thank you. So one, I think, is to share your experience. I wouldn't underestimate the powerful voice that nurses can bring into economic conversations. And people might shy away from the word economy because I think the idea of economy, so often we think about men in suits and numbers on TV screens and people around a board table making decisions. But we are all part of the economy. The original meaning of the word economy was household management. And if we extend the idea of our household to our global home, it's basically how do we take care of each other on our precious planetary home that we all share. And so we all have a right to think about the economy. We shouldn't need to ask for permission to talk about the economy in a different way. We should all be able to ask different questions about the economy. And I'll tell you what, I could count, probably I'd need 2 hands, 20 hands to count the amount of times I've been told I'm being naive, I'm being unrealistic, I'm being a fluffy bunny, I'm being a bleeding heart, because I'm saying, couldn't the economy do something different than just focus on profit and extraction and gross domestic product? Couldn't we have an economy that's not on top of us, where we're all in service of the economy? And I'll tell you, actually, so this is where I go off on a tangent, but today I was in a supermarket, and in Australia, they're eradicating people who are working at the checkouts. You basically have to go and check out your own, what you're buying. So there's no one working at the checkouts anymore. And one, I'm a little bit useless, so I always get it wrong and I need help anyway. But I was talking to the woman who was working there, and she said they are laying off all her colleagues, they're cutting their hours. And why is that? In order to be able to reduce labor costs so the owners of that supermarket chains can extract more money and send it up to shareholders. And so to me, what we should be thinking about is how can the economy serve us? And to come back to your question, I really think nurses have an incredibly powerful voice in this. I really wouldn't underestimate your unique place in society. So use your spheres of influence. You'll all have families, you'll all sit on the bus next to someone when you're going out to a movie or to a football match or to work. Talk to folk. If you can unionize, and mobilize through collective institutions, unions particularly, if you can agitate with civil society. And I know that in some contexts that's easier than others, but if you feel safe doing so, join with civil society organizations. And I mentioned at the beginning, I used to work for Oxfam, and they will be organizing in many, many countries, work on fighting inequality, calling for living wages, calling for taxes on the wealthiest. So get involved in that, partner up as a nursing organization, but also as individuals. And also just, really bring your own testimony. I was speaking to a friend last week who's a cardiologist, and she was telling me about a practice she has in really rural Australia. And she was talking to a young woman who'd had a heart attack. And this young woman said to her, I'm going to stop smoking. And my friend, the cardiologist, said, well, let's listen to your story. This young woman comes from an abusive household. She's taking care of a profoundly disabled child. She's also taking care of her father, who's terminally ill. She's on very, very small government support. So no wonder she is stressed. No wonder her heart is in overload. And yet in this, this woman's narrative, it was just she'd stop smoking. But you can unpack those stories and take that testimony, take that witness to wider audience. And just to really reiterate, nurses will be listened to in a way that no one else in society will be listened to. And just I'd say this as a message to everyone here, really feel that you're welcome in this conversation about the economy. There's this organization that I mentioned earlier, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and it's people from all over the world who want to transform the economy but want to work with others to do so. And so feel free to be part of that. They have regular calls, they have meetings for members to share ideas, encourage each other, support each other, add impact to each other's work, and just really have each other's back. Because make no mistake, economic systems change is hard. It's exhausting, and the system will push back and fight back against it. So we need to do this collectively. We need to link arms, take care of each other while we're doing so, and have a bit of love and fun while we're doing it as well. And that's what the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is about. So I hope that starts to answer your question a little bit, but thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So enjoying this chat, Katherine. I think we need you every week.
Love that.
Next up is Georgia from China.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yutong Gao. You can call me Georgia. I'm from China and I'm a registered nurse. My question is, Katherine, could you please give us more suggestions on how should we, as Chinese newly career nurses, be proactive in seeking greater ownership of real assets, or what we can do to push cooperatives to develop? Because, as is mentioned in the book, broadening the ownership of assets, democracy is beneficial to all. And China is a socialist country, and the Communist Party of China is a one-party dictatorship. And nurses in mainland China do not have enough, or do not have any support or guilds or nursing associations for the nurses' rights and interests. And the nearest meeting in our country, which is at the 20th People's Congress in 2023, when the biggest decision of policies are made. None of the speeches made by the nurses delegates are centered on improving the status of nurses and safeguarding their rights and interests. So when we are eager to improve the social status, the profile and profits of Chinese nurses, and wants to participate in sharing more resources, and we are generally on our own, under the control of a one-party dictatorship, are there any suggestions or general directions on how to safely promote the development of cooperatives, or the moves we can do? Thank you.
Georgia, thank you.
Thanks, Georgia. And there's a few layers to your question there around how in a
so maybe just pick maybe one if you can. And I guess some of that question is not. It's not just China, it is globally. The challenge we face as a profession is a global challenge, so maybe a bit broader. Thank you so much, Georgia.
Yeah, thanks, Georgia. And I think really the sort of space to have this civil society space is something we all around the world need to keep fighting for and protecting as much as we can. You mentioned cooperatives, which are one of my absolute favorite things to talk about. So these are businesses owned by their workers, where workers make decisions and where the commercial success of the business benefits the worker because the worker is the owner. So you don't have the difference between labor and capital because labor owns the capital. And there are so many examples of cooperatives around the world. If those of you who know Scotland, and I think, Georgia, you're studying in Scotland at the moment, if I remember rightly. So there's a little town in the southwest of Scotland called New Lanark, where one of these sort of original cooperatives was founded by a chap called Robert Owen. And it's why I love cooperatives is because what they do is they shift the balance of power. And they're basically about rejigging who the economic activity is working in the interest of. And one of the things I get increasingly excited about is the idea that we could pre-distribute wealth. So I talked earlier in my answer to Ibrahim about the idea of redistribution. So after economic inequality happens through the market, government could maybe step in and rebalance through progressive taxes and welfare and so on. The other half of that conversation is pre-distribution, so which is a bit of a clunky term, so bear with me. But essentially, it's about saying, how can the market side of the economy basically do more of the heavy lifting? So how can we design market outcomes so they don't let that gap between rich and poor open up so much in the first place? And so it's things like ownership, minimum wages, maybe even maximum wages, earnings ratios, and things like community wealth building, where you have local ownership generating economic activity from the community up, rather than hoping trickle-down economics might happen. And co-ops are a really, really important part of that. And so if there are cooperatives in China, and my knowledge about China, Georgia, forgive me, is not rich enough to know about the economic ecosystem, but if there are worker-owned businesses, well, if you can shop at them, buy your bread. So there's a beautiful local bakery here that's owned by workers, but also hospitals are a pretty hefty economic actor in the town or the village or the city. And they will buy things. They will need to buy sandwiches. They will need to buy cleaning of the sheets. They will need to buy cleaning of the local corridors. And there's a really good story about the town Cleveland in Ohio in the US. And what they've got there is worker-owned cooperatives who are basically contracting to the hospital there to do the cleaning service and to do the catering service. And so that way the money is not being sucked up to remote shareholders. It's staying in Ohio. And so maybe there are questions that could be asked about, right, we're working at this hospital. Here's money we know we're going to have to spend. Could we spend it locally? Could we make sure it goes to local businesses? Could we make sure it goes to, creates local jobs? And to use an economics term with you, it is called the local economic multiplier. And basically, it keep the money circulating in the local area, which is basically the alternative to hoping for trickle-down economics, which, believe me, we have got so much evidence trickle-down economics doesn't work. So this is a great alternative, basically, an antidote to that faith in trickle-down economics. But yeah, there's some great stories about cooperatives. A really famous one is Mondragon in the Basque region of Spain. There's some beautiful videos and really inspiring to learn about Mondragon. And Georgia, thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Wow, this is so good. I hope everyone is listening to these little sound bites and things for us to take away with us now. We are almost on time, and I want to make sure that Sana and Hassan get their question in, but we're almost there with it. But pre-distribute health, local economic multiplier, shifting the balance of power. These are things that we can do. I've got so many ideas. Oh, local ownership, because you have nursing local ownership models. And actually our Nursing Now challenge, we're trying to really get that grassroots going again, like we did with Nursing Now, so that the agency is at grassroots level. Wonderful stuff. I need to stop talking now with excitement. So over to the chapter 10, which has been named From Individual Initiatives to Wider Change, Agitation, Amplification. From individual initiatives to wider change, agitation, amplification, and attention. That's it, 3 A's. So Sana, wonderful Sana, still fresh from her awards, from Pakistan, but currently working with us here in the UK and training as a midwife. Sana, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katherine. So my question is from chapter 10, which I could have related much more than other chapters as a nurse. So it's about system transition. In chapter 10, we talk about the system transition actually happening in 3 levels of the system: the niche, the regime, and the landscape. When I put that in the perspective of changing the transition of nursing and midwifery workforce globally, we do often see that the landscape, the macro level change is already there. We are already asking those big questions, we are challenging the status quo, but we hardly see that macro level change translating to the micro level. At how do we empower or enable the bedside nurses and midwives to be part of that transition?
Sana, thank you so much for your question. So I'm just going to share with the audience. I haven't got a slide deck here, but hopefully I've just drawn on here. I don't know if you can see that. This is a very crude version of something that Sana just mentioned, the 3 levels. And this comes from this something that I think folks in the economic change movement find incredibly helpful, called the multi-level system perspective. And it's basically from Frank Giles, who's at the University of Manchester, I think he still is, where it says, in a system like the economy, you have these 3 layers. So at the top, you get the sort of landscape level. And this is, as Sana talked about, this is where asking big questions. How do we think about the economy? The next one down is the policy regime. So this is the rules of the game set up by often government, taxes, regulations, subsidies, those sorts of things that shape what's possible. And then underneath that, you have the niche level of activity of pioneers, of projects, of enterprises, of amazing initiatives, and they all interact. And the key thing is that they can inspire each other. So cool stuff that's happening at the niche level can inspire others to replicate it. Pioneers demonstrate not just what's desirable, but what's feasible. And so the more you have of that replication horizontally, the more we can start to move towards a tipping point. But so often where there's no shortage of, as I said earlier, there's no shortage of cool activities and chinks of light that give us hope. But until we change the rules of the game, they'll be isolated and vulnerable. And so we need to change the policy level as well. And changing policy level will be easier if we change how we think about the economy. If we're not just saying, well, we all need to be in service of the economy, but we're asking that question, how can the economy be in service of us? And so to come to your question around how can we harness the conversation amongst nurses, it's already happening around those big questions at the landscape, the paradigm level. I think it's joining up. It's joining up with patients groups. It's joining up with doctors groups. I mentioned unions earlier, other unions as well. So obviously nurses unions, so you get the collective, but other colleagues in other professions, environmental groups as well. Here in Australia, there's increasing recognition, for example, of the impact of the environmental crisis on the health system. And so the government is, speaking of failure demand, the government is plugging in more and more money into the health system to deal with things like increased heat waves, which is going to lead to increased presentations at hospital and deaths, increased asthma because of pollution, increased floods and so on. In the city of Melbourne, they have appointed heat officers to take care of vulnerable people in times of extreme heat, which is utterly necessary. I'm all for that. But isn't that a sign of failure demand? Isn't that a sign that we haven't got things right at the beginning? And so I really think it is about joining up with folks that have a shared interest and bringing, again, as I said in my answer to Aman, your powerful, powerful testimony that nurses have. And so taking those lessons in coalition, it's a lot easier. And this is perhaps partly also an answer to Georgia. Working in coalition, you have protection in numbers that way. So yeah, just keep asking those questions and don't flinch when someone says, oh, you're being naive to question the purpose of the economy, because I get that a lot. Just keep going, because I think the ultimate naivety is people who think business as usual can carry on. Change is coming, and it's either going to be catastrophic, as we're already seeing, or as a society, we can get on the front foot and start to manage it and start to bring about the transformation that we need to make things not as bad as they already look like they're going to be. So Sana, thank you so much for your question. And I'd love to learn more about how you're seeing people asking these big questions. I know Aisha is, but it's really very encouraging to hear that others are as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's wonderful. Right. Okay. Final question over to Hassan. Hassan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you for Catherine. You just removed the trauma that I have from authors like Barnett, Georgia Gambit, and Amartya Coulson, who put a very fluffy words to explain a very simple thing. The Yellow Book is absolutely amazing, and it's feel touchy because it's bringing both economics, climate change to the comprehensible things about the system change, the shift. And in myself, I've been calling myself advocate for equality for my whole life, but I think I'm gonna go to be like an arrival activist right now. That's a new member to the family. So my question is, when it's come to establishing the new norm, like the new normal setting, particularly when you were speaking about mobilizing the public opinion toward like actionable policies, recommendation at the economy of arrival. The book heavily assumes that community are oriented and aware that there is a need for change, and also assume that the community is aware that they are able to achieve it. So you, as a thinker, as a theorist, also in the same book acknowledge that going beyond the normal is often unthinkable. How do you perceive this need to shift the community's kind of rhetoric, to change it, to be able to think beyond these kind of, the economic is unchangeable, it has to be all this men in suit talking about this kind of statistic and stuff. And another part could be perhaps tools like co-production of knowledge, co-production of services, be like an approaches for activists like myself to approach the arrival, to make it like a everyday kind of thing.
Oh, Hassan, awesome question. And it has to be co-produced, doesn't it? Because it has, one of the key aspects of this has to be about shared power and power from the bottom up. And that's a complete contrast to so often how power structures currently exist and operate today. Where I find hope is, I've been so fortunate throughout my life, well, my working life, is to be part of deliberative democracy exercises. I first got into these conversations by working on a project many years ago for Oxfam, really asking people what most matters to them around Scotland, in very, very, very different parts of Scotland. And then with my colleagues in Oxfam India, we ran a very, very similar program in very different contexts, but asking similar sort of questions around, what most matters to you, what makes a good life. And then a colleague of mine did a very similar project in Namibia. So 3 very different contexts. But what's amazing is when you give people the chance to just pause and reflect on what's most important to them, people around the world say very, very remarkable similar things. It's about health. It's about having enough to live on. So not having sort of footballer type salaries, but having enough to live on to participate in society, sense of dignity and purpose, about relationships and safety and time in nature. And sometimes they use different words, but actually I remember watching a video that was made from the Namibian project, and the conversations with people in Namibia were remarkably similar to the conversations with people in Glasgow. And what that reminds us is actually there's something that makes us innately human about, yes, we reach to build our lives in different ways, and there's incredible diversity around the world, which makes the world beautiful. But the other aspect of the beauty of the world is how we do share in common the sense of, really those fundamental human needs. And so I think starting there is to really be honest, because I'm just, between you and I, Hassan, I'm feeling quite depressed about the state of the world and the hope of change. Where I find hope is through conversations that start from that premise of what's our common humanity, and from that building solutions together. So you use the word co-production. I think that's what it has to be like. I think it has to be about listening. It has to be about conversations about what matters to people, and then reflecting and building together. How can we get there? On a practical note, I think the sequence matters. I think we can't impose changes on people. So, I mean, to give a really simple, we can't currently say to people, I'll stop using your cars in, say, a city like the one I'm living in, until without first getting a really decent public transport system, for example. Or we can't start telling people to stop not throwing things out if the recycling infrastructure isn't there. Or we can't say or start condemning, say, fast fashion if there hasn't been a cultural shift around how we treat clothing and how we show our social affiliation. So that the sequence of things really, really matters. one of your other questions, I think, was around the idea of different measurements. And I have this dream project, and maybe we could do this in our part 2 workshop. I call them cornerstone indicators. And it's basically, how could we come up with measures that really speak to the different dimensions of collective well-being? So health, housing, relationships, sense of purpose, dignity, nature, economic sufficiency. But they also have to pass another test, and that is that they have to make intuitive sense to everyday people. And Aisha's probably heard me give this example. I've never tested this example, so it may not be right, but the way I sort of illustrate this idea is, imagine if mayors of, say, the city of Liverpool, where I think you're based, imagine if the mayor of Liverpool, Steve Rotherham, I think, is just being re-elected. Imagine if he said, under my watch, the number of girls who ride their bikes to school is going to go up. Not going to focus on gross value add in the economic region of Liverpool, but the number of girls who ride their bikes to school. Because if that number's going up, parents have enough money to buy bikes. They have enough money to buy breakfasts for their daughters. The streets are safe. They're not polluted. There's local services. And maybe we could come up with maybe half a dozen others. So just have that in the back of your mind until we meet again in, I think, a month or so time, because maybe we could kick around some ideas for nursing and what makes good nursing context. Thanks, Hassan.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I mean, oh golly, this has been such a great experience, and that's because of the wonderful panel: Ibrahim, Sana, Hassan, Georgia, Aaron, and I am, and also kicking off with Howard this morning, and of course the just absolutely ray of sunshine, Katherine. And it's been super. The conversations in the chats, we have got some serious senior leaders on who have joined us today. Raweda, who has been a minister and from Jordan and advises on many things in the Middle East, and Her Royal Highness also, she has joined us. Fantastic. The Nigerian GCNMO chief nurse. I mean, this is good. So you can see how interesting this topic is for us. Just unearthing it, uncovering it, taking the lid off. And I think you're right. People think, they hear the word economics and they think, what has that got to do with nursing? And actually, it has everything to do with nursing. So today, I think I see this as the first step of this engagement that we are going to have. I'm so looking forward to the second session. I'm just checking. I don't think we have any questions in the chat, and we are a little bit over time. So what I would suggest, if anyone has any questions, feedback, things they would like to see. We've just got people saying excellent discussion and insights. Thanks to everybody. Fascinating webinar. It's so important for nursing to have a strong voice in these critical conversations of policy and global economics. I think I'm going to leave that there. Katherine, I really liked your idea, so let's talk about that together with the group that we have here, and others are welcome to join us. Just a big shout out, this afternoon we have another amazing event. We have Dr. Carrie McCarthy from the WHO HQ Geneva. Carrie is a wonderful colleague and friend of ours. She's leading the work on the state of the world's nursing, the second report Howard mentioned this morning, and she's going to give us a real insight into where that work is sitting at the minute, the work and workshops that are happening across all member states, the work that is going on with universities, all the stakeholders. We're about to have what is called the partnership meeting next week in Geneva. The State of the World's Nursing Report is a huge piece of work for us to utilise, along with this other narrative that Katherine has touched on and our wonderful panel have engaged with. I'm telling you, nurses talking about this, it's brilliant. It is just so the best. And we can all do it. We all have a part to play. People are just saying, so proud of you, Nigeria. We're so proud of you. Oh, it's so lovely. I love it. I love it. So many notes. But I think I'm going to just give you some key pointers about what Katherine said today in relation to the questions. We need countries to have conversations. We need nurses to have conversations. We need to engage with the economic ecosystem. Cooperatives, worker cooperatives, consider those to shift the balance of power, pre-distribution of health. the local economic multiplier, and local ownership. And that's the thing. Nurses are at every point of people's journey in life. That's what makes us so important. The art and the science. We are artists and scientists. We undertake complex decision making. We are the most trusted profession. We are the largest global health workforce. There is a reason that we are not having a voice, and that is because we actually have unknown power, and we have to utilize that. So let's start doing that now, and let's address the bodies that bear the scars. And I love arrival advocates. That's a great phrase. That's the new phrase. We're arriving, everyone, just watch out. Okay, the next session, I can't remember the date for that, but we will put it out there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and see you this afternoon, hopefully not too late to sign up. And Katherine, thank you so much from the other side of the world. And to our wonderful panelists.
Been an utter absolute honor to join you, and thank you so much, everyone, and stay in touch.
The yellow boot. And Ibrahim, gorgeous dress. And seriously, this is just the beginning of this conversation. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye.